I think one of the biggest things that really comes down to is that authentic relationship building and having a community. So as a brand, you can have a brand community, but on the human to human level, you still need to build trust, whether that's when you're closing the deal, working with your CSM, like keeping that relationship going, being brought in as, a cab member or a champion. Those are the reason they're successful, because they have strong communities and they have strong brand affinity. Community can mean so many things. It can mean social media. It can mean like encouraging and lifting up your community users online. Like there's so many things it can mean, but in some way that then still translate to in person, because then you want to see that person at the upcoming trade show or at your, regional community event or dinner and know who they are. They want you to know who they are.
Welcome back to In-Person GTM Pros, the podcast where we interview industry leaders shaping the future of go-to-market. I'm joined by my co-host, Brian Alvarez-Cohen, Chief Product Officer at Popl. And today our guest is Stephanie Pennell, founder and owner of the Event Critic, a modern event marketing consulting firm helping brands scale growth and build loyalty through in-person channels. Previously, Steph was head of event marketing at ZoomInfo, and she also served as chief of staff to CROs and CMOs for some of the world's most iconic B2C brands. Steph's B2C roots provide a fun and refreshing approach to event marketing, while her enterprise B2B experience allows her to resonate with revenue leaders focused on scalability and ROI. In this episode, we unpack a few key topics, including what successful in-person marketing looks like in practice, the role of company culture in a successful in-person strategy, and budget-conscious tactics for teams focused on measuring ROI from events. Let's get into it. Welcome, Steph, the Event Critic, Pennell, to the podcast. We are super excited to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited for today's conversation. So we'll dive straight into it here. And when I first reached out to you about doing this podcast, I showed you a page on our website that I had put together. The headline of the page said, "The future of marketing is in person." And you said, I think in typical Event Critic fashion, that you would challenge me on that. So could you remind us what you said about that?
Yeah, I mean, critic is like basically in my name and my middle name in real life anyway. So I was like, well, wait a second, like the future of marketing isn't in person. My gut reaction was like, it's not the future, it's how it's always been. It's like the foundation. So, when you think about any type of marketing that we're doing or selling or even customer success, before there were computers, people were like sending letters and meeting in person, and that was it, right? And so the big draw was to bring people together and be in person. And obviously with the talk of AI, like if you aren't starting to utilize AI in your day-to-day, no matter what your job is, you will get left behind. But there are very significant components that cannot be replicated or taken over by AI. And that's like your interactions in person, picking up on emotional responses to things. So there's so many things that AI can do from a logistical and tactical perspective, but AI can't sit down at dinner and bond over like your dogs or your kids or the college you both went to and close the deal.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot of people are talking about in person, and we think that the reason that's happening is because we're drowning in this AI noise. And we've always been doing in person. In person has always been really the core of how people connect and transact.
Yep.
And so with technology and AI coming into the picture like it is, I think people are really desperate to reconnect in person. And so I think that's what we're seeing here. And that leads us into our next topic. So recently, one of your more popular LinkedIn posts, when you announced the Event Critic to the world, I'm going to read this verbatim. He said, "I have some strong opinions on what works and what doesn't. B2B is boring. And if we don't change our ways, B2B event marketing will be dead." and I'm tapping into my B2C background to bring experiential marketing to the forefront in B2B with a little like perfection hand emoji. I appreciate that touch there. So there's a lot to unpack here. The first thing is, can you give us a quick rundown of what is the Event Critic?
Yeah. So I'm not going to lie. It kind of started as a joke. I hit the point where I was like, I know that events can be better. It's not events that I'm no longer enjoying. It's my environment. And so I, made the decision like what I need to do for me is quit my job. And I didn't have a total plan behind that. I flew to the south of France, partied with my friends for a week, came back with like, a pretty nasty hangover and jet lag and was like, I need to make money. And I always knew that I would basically, consult or contract for events. But I was talking to someone at one point before I quit, and I was like, oh, I'd love to do something like a food critic, but for events. And it came up like, oh, the event critic. And I like immediately did that thing where you see if the website's available, and it was available and no one was calling themselves that. And I was like, did I just strike gold? Because one of the biggest things from a marketing perspective is finding that white space, that one niche that doesn't necessarily exist. And it took off. And at first, I didn't really have clients. I was kind of just happy to chill for a bit, to be completely honest, because events are a grind. And I was like, I'll just start attending events. I was getting invited to events to actually review, provide feedback back to the organizer. I had, a lot of people who attended the event asking what they thought could have been better because they had opinions as well. And it wasn't always getting back to the event organizers. And then my business kind of took off and I started almost becoming a critic for internal companies. So I started bringing on clients and looking at how they did things internally, everything from the actual event logistics and venues to how they track ROI and do their pre-booked one-on-one meeting motion. And so I then kind of came like an internal critic within my clients. And so, yeah, it's funny. I've also done a lot of like work on myself since quitting my job. And I'm like, critic seems negative. So I'm just like a very happy critic now.
There you
I
go.
love that. I love that spin. It's happy critic.
Yeah.
But Steph, so you said you had this sort of inkling that events could be better. And then you went and you did some traveling and did some partying. And I'm curious, like, what was it that made you feel like events could be better? And I'm curious if there was anything from the more traditional style of partying that maybe you realized could apply to the more traditional like trade show style events.
Well, hell yeah. So my background, like before I got into marketing, I worked in a bar. And really, fundamentally, what it comes down to is you're bringing people together in a common space. And oftentimes, those people have common beliefs or common interests. And if they don't have commonality amongst each other, then they're challenging each other or learning about each other. That a good example is absolutely the south of France because I was immersed in their culture and how they live. And I was like, wow, this is such a cool experience. And you can recreate that type of vibe without flying, your team and all your customers to the south of France or anywhere else for that matter. But you just have to do it smarter. And it can be done, but a lot of like, I'll probably say this 20,000 times on this podcast, but it comes down to authenticity and just like true old fashioned connection, which in B2B is tough because a lot of people think of B2B as like you're selling to a company, but you're not, you're selling to a human.
Yeah. A big theme that kind of we're hearing come through here is like humanizing it all. And it really does come down to the people that are making up the event and their interactions with each other. And along these lines, also in that LinkedIn post, you mentioned that you feel like B2B was boring and in some ways maybe dying, and that there's some attributes of B2C that could apply to really help these types of events. Could you touch on that and what it was about B2B that was in particularly boring and how maybe B2C could play a helpful role here?
Yeah. And just to clarify, when I say B2B is boring, I don't mean that the work that's being done isn't important. It's more like how the work is being shown to the rest of the world. So when you think about unforgettable experiences or you think of your favorite B2C brand, what do they do really well? They're selling to you directly, and they're creating emotion and creating brand affinity and treating you like a human and playing into your interests. And so what a lot of organizations have a hard time doing is tapping into that authentic emotion and those authentic experiences in a way that is still quote unquote B2B. Early on in my events career, I was working at an agency and all of my clients were B2C. And then when I switched into B2B, I was like coming to the table with all these really creative and more like I'm thinking about the individual ideas. And a lot of them have just been shot down over the years. So it's a fine line. And I also think there's a lot that B2C can learn about B2B, but really I think it's going to come down to any experiential elements that you can pull in to your B2B events.
I'm curious because we like to get really like practical in these sorts of discussions. I'm curious if you give us like a real world example of whether it was an event you put on or event you went to where you saw they had like a really authentic experience that kind of conveyed this sort of community you're talking about here and what that looked like.
So this was like my B2C days, and it was at Governor's Ball concert in New York, and Kleenex was our client. They wanted to do an activation at the concert, and it's kind of like, well, how does Kleenex fit into this, right? They were launching for the first time their Kleenex wet wipes, which probably a lot of people listening to this are like, they've always been around. And the way that, I was a junior at the agency I was working at, but the way that this senior team leads and the producers that we worked with executed on this was so like perfect, because what we did was set up a 2-story VIP lounge out of shipping containers and created mock showers and sinks. And from the showers and sinks, the wet like Kleenex pulled out. So when you're sweaty and at a concert, you could go freshen up. But also we provided body paint and body chalk. And as everyone, all the youngins at those things like to get all dolled up and stuff. And so it was like perfect because everyone who was at that concert, it was right by one of the main stages, could just pop in and, work, add some makeup, clean up some sweat, hot days, like, and it brought everyone together in such an authentic way. Like that's an experience you'll never forget. Like, remember that one time I took a shower with a Kleenex wipe at Governor's Ball.
And that brand is tattooed on your brain when you think of that memory and that experience.
Yeah. And that's what it is. It's creating those memorable experiences because like I'll use Popl as an example. The first time someone from Popl ever reached out to me, and this wasn't an event, but the first time someone from Popl ever reached out to me, I remembered how good of a job they did at selling to me, like showing brand affinity and all of those like really important things. And look, as my career progressed and actually Popl progressed as well, did I remember exactly what Popl did? No, not really. But then when it came back up, I was like, oh, I know that brand and I remember that brand. So I'm going to like pay attention. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
No, that just makes me so happy to hear because, and Bryce and I, remember the founding team, we talk about this a lot. It's a big part of our culture is like, it's the people behind the product. Yes, we are building a B2B product, but at the end of the day, we want to think about the people actually using it. And we want to connect with them on a personal level. We want to make them smile. We want to make them feel welcome. And so I love that story that like, that's what was your takeaway. Your initial takeaway from Popl was not necessarily maybe exactly what it did, but it was just like the human interaction that you had from it. Yeah.
Well, especially because people are getting sold to every freaking minute of every day. So with the amount of vendors, especially when I was still working at Zoom Info, like they saw my name, saw my title, and I would just get my inbox was littered with people trying to sell me stuff all day, every day. And so it's like hard to sift out the noise.
This is going to be a perfect transition to the next section. But before we do, I have to hop in. So you talked about bringing B2C to B2B. And when we talked about that, it reminded me of a quote from Anthony Kenneda's book, a mutual connection of ours that we've talked about before. Former CMO at Gainsight, multi-CMO, multi-founder, and has written a book about category creation and came up with this idea of B to H, business to human, which is the merging of B2B and B2C. And the idea is that behind every logo that us marketers and salespeople are trying to sell to is a human just trying to make the best decisions for their own personal life and their career. Yeah. And when you approach B2B with that, knowing that there's a human behind the decision that needs to be made, it can really completely revolutionize the way you approach marketing and selling. And you come with a more human-centric strategy. So that's awesome. I appreciate that, you bring the B2C mindset to B2B. And I think there's a lot of people that could benefit from that. But moving on to the big topic of the day is IPM. This is the IPM Pros podcast. And so when going back to when we first talked about this, one of your questions to me was, how is IPM different than event marketing? And I think that you are uniquely positioned to be able to give your perspective and an answer on this, given that you are an entrepreneur and the founder at the Event Critic. You are the former head of event marketing at ZoomInfo, former field marketing manager at NextThink, and you've also been chief of staff to a CRO and CMO. So you have seen marketing and in-person sales from many different angles in many different roles. My answer to this was, while event marketing is a functional group or department within a company that has a very structured set of goals and procedures, in-person is a go-to-market strategy framework that prioritizes in-person across your entire organization and makes sure that anytime anyone from your company interacts with someone in the wild, they don't even have to be on the marketing or sales team. That interaction gets documented digitally, measured, and then kicks off a series of automations in the background that allows people to do what they do best, which is be humans and have great conversations like this. So that being said, and given all your background, so curious to hear your take on where event marketing sits, field marketing altogether.
I've had a few career identity crises, but it worked because I got to see the side of sales and I got to see other departments in action. And it really helped well-round my experience. But honestly, if you're thinking about the motion of IPM, it's either embedded in a company's culture or it's not. And from my personal experience, which obviously isn't, it's with I guess now that I own my own company and have clients, I've seen this in 10 different organizations. A lot of times it ties directly back to the CEO or some other C-suite member or the C staff as a whole. And so if leadership sees in-person connection as a strategic growth driver, then that's where it's going to be a part of the culture and it's going to be put forward. You're going to get budget for it. You're going to get access to the tools you need to be successful at it. And that's not just in marketing. That has to be across sales, CX, and even product, because in order to throw a great event, you're also going to need sales and SDRs to help with pre-event and post-event outreach and getting butts in seats. And then the product's going to have to be top notch. So you're not showing up with a cool event and a shit product. And then customer success needs to get their, the clients and customers involved. And then the second piece, and then I'll get off my soapbox, is it has to be part of the broader marketing strategy. So multiple times I've looked at a company's plan, or even one of the companies I was at years ago, and they'll have the campaign calendar, and it basically has every piece of marketing that is slated for however, far in advance they look at their calendar, but not events. And I'm like, oh, where's the events calendar? And they're like, oh, it's over here. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Because if you're keeping that disconnected from everything else, how are you going to build a strong storyline, which is some of that stuff you need to pull in from B2C, and measure properly influence and demand generation from those in-person experiences without having it be a part of your overall strategy. So it's almost like you need to look at the flow. And the way I talk about this is, okay, I come in and I'm like, all right, what are the trade shows you absolutely have to be at? Those are some of your pillars throughout the year. And then the next thing I look at is, are there any product announcements around those dates? Because you can't move those trade shows. What you can do is adjust everything else in your calendar around those trade shows and around product launches that can fill in the gaps in between. So I like to look at it almost as like a wave of like, what are the things that you can control and what are the things you cannot? And how do you work around the ones that you can't?
I think that's actually a really interesting point. It's putting trade shows it's putting them first and saying, okay, these are the trade shows that we want to go to. Let's work around that. Maybe let's plan the product launches around that rather than the opposite where it's, okay, we're launching this product now, or we're starting the strategy here. What are some trade shows that might be relevant around these timings? It's kind of the reversal, which I think is a really great indicator. If you do have a strong IPM culture and this is what you're prioritizing, because if IPM is, if people are prioritizing as much as they should, then these are how you should be building around and kind of should be the backbones. And Steph, I'm curious if, you talk about how important it is to have a strong IPM culture. What are some ways that teams can look to implement this internally? Rather than just, having events and prioritizing those and sending people to them. Are there other ways that you think that teams can spread this across the organization?
Yeah. It's tough because again, like in my experience, it really, really depends on the culture. So for a while, I was in an environment where it wasn't that important. And so every day I was actually fighting to do my job, right? Both from a budget perspective, getting approvals, making people like believe that the things I was doing were important, which really crushed my core values because one of them is excellence. And I was like, I can't do this with excellence if people don't understand why I'm doing the things I'm trying to do here and the impact that we could drive. So I think if you go into an organization that is on the cusp of being in the wrong direction, anti-IPM, you really need a strong person within the organization in a leadership role, if it's not you, who can help build the case for why this is important. And this is the other kicker, like a lot of marketing campaigns, you can't see the return overnight. So you really have to like go all the way back to step one and say, okay, give me X amount of money. Here's what we're going to do with it. What does success look like for you? Define those success metrics and then be very upfront. This needs 30, 60, 90 at minimum. Look back to see how we really move the needle. And then you really need to just start trying to show those wins as soon as possible. But even then, like if the CEO or whoever holds your budget is not vibing with the IPM, like, yeah, it'll be an uphill battle. It really will.
Brian, it's interesting the way you asked that question. Instead of how do you figure out how to drive more impact from events, it's how do you start from the inside out, right? Instead of saying, let's just go to events and then figure out how to get everyone bought in. It's like, how do we create a culture shift here? And Steph, to your point, it's very difficult, right? Depending on what your leaders have, what their mindset is. Do you think it comes down to personalities? Like at the end of the day, whether in person seems valuable to an executive or not? What do you think is, if you could pinpoint something that drives an IPM focused culture versus an anti-IPM culture?
I feel like it's actually probably if they've seen what good looks like in this area versus not. So if they haven't seen what good can look like, and they haven't seen that like sometimes you have to put money in to get the return you want, then of course they're not going to be bought in on it, right? And it's like I liken it to content creation sometimes. Like you can't always show value in the podcast you're creating or the LinkedIn posts, because we all know even now the impressions on LinkedIn, for example, aren't a true representation of reach and the impact that you are probably making. So it's a really tough one. It's like one of those hard ones that's really hard to actually measure.
It is. It's very much a long-term play, and something that you just kind of have to stick with, even if you're not seeing results immediately. Trust that is going to pay off eventually. And ideally, you have some IPM strategies in place that when it does start paying off, you actually can then put some attribution maybe to where it initially came from. But along these lines of, talking about how to do this successfully, Steph, are there any companies that come to mind of like, oh yeah, they're absolutely crushing it with this type of marketing culture?
Yeah, I think we talked about this when we first hopped on a call together, and I would say Clay and Sixth Sense are right up there. I have more experience with Sixth Sense personally. They built such a strong brand affinity, and they make the human feel like they're first. Right. So I think one of the biggest things that really comes down to is that authentic relationship building and having a community. So as a brand, you can have a brand community, but on the human to human level, you still need to build trust, whether that's when you're closing the deal, working with your CSM, like keeping that relationship going, being brought in as, a cab member or a champion. Those are the reason they're successful with IPM is because they have strong communities and they have strong brand affinity. So they've made that relationship building part of how they operate first and foremost, where some of the organizations I've worked in, that was an afterthought. And like, we just weren't there yet. So like it happened at Zoom Info, and they've done wonders since, like, they started doing wonders while I was still there. And then since I've left, like, they have really ramped up their efforts for community building, but it makes it hard to have a really impactful and successful event when you're missing some of that brand affinity. And that's when you end up relying on partners because they have good brand affinity. So it's not just like, you can recognize a brand, right? But if your experience with that brand isn't one that someone trusts or feels connected to, even if they use the product every day, like, who's to say that they're gonna actually show up to the event, right? So it's like that human to human piece plus the community piece tied together, and like that is a really strong foundation for IPM in general, I would say.
Right. Bryce, I know you got something to say, and I want to
go for it
really quickly. This, like, the immediate connection that came to my mind from what you just said, Steph, was, the classic like NPS rating in products, right? Which is like, how likely are you to recommend this product to a colleague or friend? It's almost really interesting. You could say, like, how likely are you to come to an event put on by this product, by this company? It's like that will kind of show your affinity to their brand and what they're building.
Yeah, it's like the beer rule when you're hiring someone, like, or if you don't drink or wine, whatever, like, would you want to go have a glass of wine with that person? If not, then you probably don't want to work with them too. Like, the beer rule.
Bryce, I'm sorry, I know I cut you off, so I'll let you keep going.
No, and just to add one last thing there, it's, you see when you talk about community building, and there's overlap, but typically there are different teams tackling these things. But if you have a cohesive strategy that allows you to say, how do we build a community to go out there and evangelize our brand and our product to ultimately bring in more customers and more revenue? Is in person important to building a community? Would I defer to you there, but I obviously have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. I feel very strongly, like, I think the whole idea of communities really popped up and got big during the pandemic, right? Like, everyone was just starving for human connection during that time.
Yeah.
So you can build it, like, virtually. However, if you're thinking about a broader event strategy, you've got your trade shows, you've got your field events, you've got your, internal events. And then I would almost say another type of event is a subset of community events. And it almost fits into the community realm, where that's an offering on top of community. But community can mean so many things. It can mean social media. It can mean, like, encouraging and lifting up your community users online. Like, there's so many things it can mean, but in some way that then still translate to in person, because then you want to see that person at the upcoming trade show or at your, regional community event or dinner, and know who they are, and they want you to know who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about Zoom Info as an example. We all know Zoom Info. We know there's a big budget there, right? So event attending, exhibiting, things like that, or community building are not prohibited by budgets. But for companies who are prohibited by budget, are there any tactical strategies or tool that you've seen work well for smaller or just more budget strapped companies to enjoy the fruits of in person, particularly maybe around events and conferences, where they can be resourceful but still get value out of these?
Yeah. I think that there's two big ones. And the first one, I'm just waiting for someone from one of these massive trade shows to reach out to me and be like, can you stop saying that? The first one is do not pay for the booth at the trade show. Do ancillary events. Like if you are on a tight budget, like get the little diner across the street from the conference center, get a suite in the hotel close by for one-on-one meetings. Like you might, depending on your budget, not be able to get both brand recognition and awareness, but at minimum, you can drive some demand and pipeline acceleration with a one-to-one meeting motion in a much cheaper setting. That also allows you the luxury of controlling the narrative. So if you're hosting one-on-one meetings all day, every day, and you're in charge of inviting who's going to go to those, you know you're going to talk to the people you want to talk to and not the people coming up to your booth for swag. So that's number one. Number two is then still enter the conference. So use a tool like Popl to go in and work the floor. I actually got poppled. I don't know if you guys say that, but I got poppled at Shop Talk. I was there recently with a client and oh my gosh, I forget his name. He was lovely. And he came right up. He walked into our booth and sold me, like pitched me. And that is like, if you have an outgoing SDR team and AEs or CEO, whoever the hell can go, like you work the floor. And I actually did learn that from Zoom Info. Henry, the CEO, was always like, don't just stand in the booth, go work the floor. And you, like, obviously when we were also, sponsoring the booth, like, yeah, we had a lead scanner, but if you don't have a lead scanner, there are tools that you can get to go work the floor, and you should be doing it either way. And that opens up a whole different space. Like, the sponsors and speakers are going to be listed on the website. Scrape the website, make a hit list of who you want to talk to when you're on site. I was probably on that hit list at Shop Talk and he found me, like there's so many different things, but I think those are the two biggest, just like focusing on ancillary events and owning the narrative. That way you're not guessing who you're going to actually get to engage with. And then going out and finding those people as well on the show floor. If someone is your ICP and they're speaking on the main stage, go to their session and pounce on them after the session. Everyone does it. You can do it too.
Yeah. I think these are really great. And I just want to like quickly summarize so that, it's super clear. The first thing you said, Steph, which I think is a hot take, but I think it's a really good one. And as you just mentioned, like this is something we use at Pop all the time is you don't need to pay for a booth.
No. I said that on stage at a conference in a presentation. Yeah.
That's bold.
Yeah.
That is bold, but I love it. And I think it's so true. And you could even consider ancillary events outside of the conference. Yeah. So that's great. You mentioned be as specific as possible with who you talk to. Don't just leave it up to the randomness of who's walking the conference floor and who wants, some of the maybe merch you're giving away. No, try to be as specific as possible. And ahead of time, do your research. Who's going? Who should I try to find, reach out to? Work the floor. So whether you have a booth or not, walk around this floor, and then be resourceful. Be resourceful with the tools that you're using to connect with people. If you don't have a booth, you might not be able to use the event provided lead retrieval, but there's other tools out there you can use before the event, during the event to connect with the people that you meet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that, when you summarize it, which thank you for doing, consultant Ryan, let me make sure I understood you here and get us all on the same page. There's some parts that sound very straightforward and some parts that I could see intimidate people, like do your research before and don't just show up and wander around. It's like have a plan. But what's beautiful about technology and this super intelligence revolution is we're getting to the point where you can log into a platform, and I'm not going to name any Popl, that you could just say, hey, I'm looking, this is what I sell. This is the type of people that usually are interested in buying from me. Tell me where I should go and who's going to be there and who I need to talk to, and let the computer help you. We're getting to the point where technology is there, and coming back to this again, letting the technology operate quietly in the background so we can do what we do best, which is go smile, shake hands, and have unforgettable moments with each other. So yeah, it's a great time to be alive. To be a B2B marketer.
No, I mean, but that is the hardest part, even if you are sponsoring a booth, because there's still so much like revenue leakage that happens because of those transferring the in-person conversations into the post-event lead follow-up. And we hear speed to lead every time we're talking about like these post-event motions. And that's the hardest part often, is extracting that. So sometimes I think there's an argument to say that if you're not at a booth and you have your own tool to walk the floor, that follow-up mishap will actually be eliminated.
Yeah, I totally agree. Should we move into our lightning round, or do we want to make sure we
best part of the podcast? I'm ready. Steph, are you ready?
I don't know. I think I skipped this part of the prep work. Let's do it.
Well, that actually works out, Steph, because lightning round, the whole point of it is these are fun, fast questions. Just, first thing that comes to mind. No need to go into detail if we don't want to on them. And the first question is, what's your most memorable conference experience? This could be a good one or a bad one.
People have probably heard me tell this story. It was probably one of the most intimidating ones. Our event space for Zoom Info, 4 days before Dreamforce called and canceled because of a maintenance issue. I said, screw you guys, you oversold the hotel. I was like, you need to give me something. They were apparently sitting on this rundown, like abandoned sneaker store, and I turned it into a Zoom Info VIP lounge in 4 days.
All right, I have some questions, so we'll go deeper into this. So
we had like 250 meetings that year.
Oh. Okay, so just to understand that, so you had a space originally that was in order to meet people. It was in addition to your booth, and that's what basically.
No booth.
Oh, no booth. This was the only presence you had at Dreamforce.
This was it. Yep.
Wow. And they said, okay, we can't give you this, but we can give you a rundown shoe store.
It actually was way better because it was storefront. So we put like real janky pull-up banners outside. And before it was going to be a suite in the hotel. So like there was no external brand awareness. The following year, we did it up with the branding so you could see Zoom Info from blocks away, and then who stole it from us. But yeah, it was wild.
Oh, that's a great story. Taking a challenge and turning it into very much a positive. That's awesome.
Yeah, in one of our previous episodes, Paul Smith, we asked a similar question. He said regarding his best advice, the best plan is to plan for your plan to go wrong, because eventually you're going to show up and your booth is not going to arrive, and you're going to have a team of people with nowhere to stand, and you're just going to have to figure it out. He calls it the smoke jumper kit. Basically, jump out of a plane, land, and figure out how to like entertain people. So I love that. Yeah. That's kind of like smoke jumper at scale with budget.
Yep. It's wild. It comes with like doing it for years. Like I forget that more junior event marketers break down in those situations. Oh, another one. We also booked Fenway for the wrong day for a private event, and we show up, start unloading. They're like, "No, your event's tomorrow." And I was like, "No, it's not." They're like, yeah, it is. 20 of us saw the contract. None of us caught it because we changed the date so many times. An hour later, I had an open bar tab at one of the bars next to Fenway. I made everyone go get a drink, brought them in for a tour of Fenway. During that time, we set up an entire event.
That's genius. Yeah, I think that's a sign of, call it mastery or an experience, but it's the ability to make things work when things are against you, or you don't have preparation ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to have that. I don't give a attitude.
100%. All right. Next question here. So 20 years in the future, it's the year 2045, and technology has advanced to a point where it can pretty much do almost anything that we want from it. What do conferences and trade shows look like in this time?
Ooh, well, this like totally frightens me. I'm not going to lie. In my brain, it's giving like Jetsons world vibes. But And I think there's got to be something around like human identification and some sort of like AI connective tissue that helps you make sure you are connecting with the right people. But from an actual like event logistics standpoint, there's got to be a faster, more efficient and eco-friendly way to create experiences. So right now, you have to reach out to create a custom build out months in advance of your event. And there's got to be a way that that's going to be like, yo, I need that tomorrow. And we're going to 3D print it or some shit. And you know what I mean? That's going to drive costs down. And that there has to be someone smarter out there than me who's listening to this. Please make that your mission. I think that's like one of the big things that is absolutely going to be a game changer.
Yeah. I love that point. And, one of the most common things we hear from this is kind of the first thing you mentioned where, it'll be very easy to recognize, anyone that you want to meet and get their information. But I think this is also a really good point. And the one we actually haven't heard, but it's basically removing almost all friction to creating quality, authentic experiences.
Yeah.
And being able to do it like, hey, we want to do this on Friday. It's Tuesday right today. So we can.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing holding you back then is, just maybe getting other people out under such short timeline. But that's probably what you want to be held back from rather than, needing to put in all the time and effort to actually put the thing together.
Yeah. And it's more around like, you never know what's going to happen. To your point, Bryce, like your booth doesn't show up. That happened to one of my clients recently. And if there was some sort of quick turnaround or fast way to just create a booth overnight, like, hell yeah.
Well, awesome. It'll be here sooner than we know it. So we'll find out.
I better be retired.
Yeah. We'll all be hanging out in the south of France.
Yeah.
There we go.
Cool. Well, Steph, this has been great. This is the end of the lightning round. So we'll wrap it up here. But before we go, can you share with the audience anywhere where they can follow along with the journey, follow you, stay connected?
Yeah, definitely. Just my LinkedIn. The Event Critic is the handle on LinkedIn. This is a good reminder for me to get better at posting on there. That is the one best place for sure right now.
Amazing. Well, Steph, again, thank you so much. This has been awesome. We had a lot of fun. We were really looking forward to this. And I think, Ryan, you can probably agree this was a really awesome experience. So looking forward to chatting again. And thanks for coming.
No, thank you so much. I had a blast.